Marty to break this down. This is what he emailed out, but
Yeah.
when you email that as the current situation,
Yep.
this is basically the change right here.
Yep.
No change plus 1 and 2.5.
Correct.
I don't think, so you understand that?
Yes, no,
I
I-
don't understand, like, so I'm saying, like, let's make pictures for people. Let's
Yep.
make things.
Well, it takes a few days of looking at it before you kind of wrap your head around it. But once you've wrapped your head around it, then it starts making sense. All right, Representative Pearson, you want to join us? I'd like to thank everybody for being here this morning.
Thank you.
We are going to be looking at Amendment 2023-0397H, an amendment that basically just completely replaces HB 436.
By happenstance, do we have a committee researcher or a committee person available that can run and grab some copies of this amendment for folks, since it wasn't? Can you go up to fourth floor?
There were copies given out.
We have them.
We have copies.
How many do you need?
10.
Okay, I have 5, so that's not going to quite cut it. Just do 10.
And then on your committee,
Do you also have some input from Mr. Carlin that I see various people have? Because I didn't get that.
That was emailed to the committee yesterday,
Ah.
and I made extra copies. in
I
case
got a
someone on the
copy.
committee didn't bring it, or somebody.
I got a
filled in
copy.
Instagram up here. So I put 10 with Representative Simon.
Oh, good. Give one to Chris and Peter while you're going by.
Apparently I didn't bring them.
Did you get one, Fred?
Kim, I left mine. I left the extra copies. I apologize.
Here.
Steve, while we're looking at those like minor things, a whole bunch of this should be bold that isn't bold.
As far as
Like the last pages, because it's technically changes and it's all just in regular writing. So if somebody else were to pick it up, they would think that it's just in statute.
so what OLS does is, I've had to deal with this in my 3 terms now, is the bold is in paragraphs where they make changes, then they have a tendency to not bold new language sometimes.
Right.
I don't know why that consistency lacks.
Because the last 4 pages, if you just picked it up, you would just assume it was in
Yeah,
statute.
yep, exactly. Page 9, 10, 11,
And
12 should all be
13,
bold. I
right.
agree. Yeah.
Hi, Marty. Good.
Going, I don't want it to be shown to the fact that it's back in the sky.
I appreciate that.
Get on the road. I just wanted to be preemptive about it. I appreciate you. Like stiff.
Yeah, no worries. Actually, Steve, while we're waiting for Carol to come back, Marty, if you wouldn't just mind, well, no, because Kim's not here and it would have been for her benefit. Just to explain how the 2.5 or 2.1%, what that stuff means for people who aren't reading this every day. You know, when I say like a 2.5% multiplier.
Yeah, I also walked through that document after Representative or with Representative Pearson next to me or after he's done.
Okay.
Whatever.
I know you're both on time constraints. so
Yes, we
sure.
are.
Yes.
You might as well just sit with me, really. I mean, because it's.
Oh, we haven't started yet.
Yeah, you might as well just sit with me, just so.
I'm still waiting for Carol to come back.
Turning around looking for me. or
Here she is.
for you.
Right. Exactly. So,
All right, Representative Pearson, let's start digging into this.
Sure, absolutely.
Right from page 1, where basically we're taking what's already in statute, we're splitting it into group 1, group 2, so that we can
Okay,
differentiate.
so back to your comment about bold. in the inconsistencies that OLS does with bolding, lines 5 through 7 should be bold.
Mhm.
They really should.
Yep.
So I'm gonna make when we bring this back down to them, we will ask. I will mark this. Please make this bold. Please make the other parts bold.
Yep.
But it's new language, and the preamble tells you it's new language. But anyway, so based back when we had the 2012 lawsuit, one of the things that came out of that was the fact that the statute did not have a definition of the term vested. It's referenced in the statute as far as qualifications for a benefit on page like 90 something, but it's not in the definition list at the beginning. So looking at the other New England states, because we are in a competitive regional labor market, 4 of the 6 New England states vest at 5 years. Massachusetts does not. They vest at 10. We've always operated under the presumption of 10. The math calculations, the debt, everything is based off of 10. So in the interest of keeping that consistent and not causing a massive upheaval,
Huge, yeah.
just leave it at 10 for qualifications of a benefit. But we have a serious trust problem in the fact that not only from a reputation point, but exteriorly to the state, but within this state, the fact that the legislature went through and made changes for people that had 10 years in. So in the definition of vested, my request here is that, or our request is, this is not just me, this is a whole bunch of us, that the 2 sections, average final compensation and earnable comp, there'll be no ability to reduce that after 3 years. That is so that people can now have some sort of planning, some sort of idea of what's going on, some sort of commitment from the state here that, this is what you expect and this is what we expect. And
So basically, after 3 years, we
After
can't go back and retroact anything.
exactly.
You can't retroact
And that's
year 4,
exact-
year 5, year 6, year 7.
That is how we got into this problem in the beginning.
Right. Okay.
So is it a little bit more bold, I suppose, than say having a tight definition of vested at 5 years? It is, but we've not taken the step of arguing for a 5-year vesting like Connecticut, Rhode Island, Maine, and Vermont.
Right.
We'll still say we want a commitment for workers to the political subdivisions in the state as well. What I don't want is for this to become hey, I'm going to do a 5-year jaunt and I'm gone. And hey, I get a little bit of something, 35 years from now. We want people to have careers. And that's why keeping it as a 10-year minimum denotes that we want people to have careers. This isn't just a fling job.
Right. No, that makes
That
sense
makes
to me. Any questions on that from? Yes, Representative True.
I might as well leave my mic on.
Well, we can only have 3 of us, Representative True.
I think I know what vested means. I work for a company, and in 10 years, my stock options are vested. They're mine now, but they weren't mine at 9 years.
Right.
What are we talking about? What can't be reduced after 3 years?
The agreement that they had when they started. So say we were going to give you a specific plan when you started, all right, and then you've worked 3 years. Once you reach that 3rd year mark, we can't change that plan on you anymore. What you agreed to originally.
It's
So
a math formula.
Yeah, the way that we got into the problem that we're in right now is some people had worked 9.5 years with an agreement in place. They thought that they were getting a benefit, and then we came in and said, "No, just kidding. You never had that benefit." So the way that I like to explain it, it's kind of like you come to work for me and I agree to pay you $30 an hour, and I'm paying you $30 an hour, and then 9.5 years later, I come in and say, "Just kidding. It was $15 an hour. And oh, by the way, you got to give me that $15 back." It's not 100% the same way, but it's kind of that idea.
That's not really, that's not a good choice. It's only about the pension benefits. They can't change your pension benefit after you have worked for 3 years.
Right.
So that if you work for 2.5 years and they say your pension is now half of what it was, that's it. But
So be
after
it.
3 years, your pension benefit calculation is frozen.
It's frozen.
I think that might be a good thing to put in to make it more explicit that you're talking about the pension benefit.
Well, it does. It references both
Yeah,
paragraphs
it
specifically.
references both of them.
I'll ask Marty to explain also what as far as what you're entitled to, if you, as far as like employee contribution and that kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. So a little bit of background. Vesting in retirement system, parlance is once you've completed 10 years of creditable service, you've earned the right to a future benefit. So whether you work another 10, 20, 30 years, or whether you stop working and then come back to us when you're eligible by age for that benefit, you're vested, as long as you keep your contributions with us, you can come back to us when you're eligible to collect a benefit and get something based on your term of service and your salary during that time. So that's what vesting means, for us. And back in 2011, when the legislature, opened up the retirement system and made a lot of changes, that legislature at the time drew the line at vested anybody who was not in the system less than 10 years. There's a lot of opinions on how that was adjudicated in court behind me, and I'm not here to comment on, I'm not a lawyer and wouldn't interpret that, but, so that's the line that legislature drew. This provision here would freeze that after 3 years of service. If there were future changes, if you were going to increase the member contribution rates, which just for example, right now for fire, it's 11.8% of pay. If a future legislature wanted to increase that to 12.5% of pay, again, just for the sake of argument, this provision would prevent that change from affecting anybody who had 3 or more years in the system, when that change was enacted. So it would affect those people with less than 3 years in future hires. Is that your understanding, Representative? Or poke me if I'm saying anything that you think is incorrect. So, okay.
But also to.
So
I think he
one
asked-
second, real quick. So you mentioned there the contribution rate wouldn't change either.
Because that paragraph's not covered.
Okay.
Okay, I was going to say
all right.
because that could cut
Yeah,
both ways.
Bad example. So
Yeah.
the number of years you need to work to retire,
Right.
is a better example. It's
That makes sense.
that I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
No, that's
I
fine.
don't want to restrict the contribution
already had my
rate.
hands
That
slapped
needs
too,
to
so it's
be
good.
potentially flexible in case we have a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not restricted. The other thing to answer your question, Representative True, has to do with what the employee puts in from day one if they don't make 10 years, and if you can cover what they get back if they leave. prior to
Yeah, sure thing. So if a member leaves service before vesting, so they don't have 10 years yet, they've worked 1 year or 9 years or whatever the case may be, they have the choice to take a refund of their accumulated contributions plus interest credited on it, during their period of service as a lump sum. They can take that as a check from us and take the tax hit, or they could roll it over into a qualified retirement plan. They don't have to. If somebody works 9 years and has to leave employment for whatever reason, whether they were laid off or they had a life issue, they're dealing with a family thing or whatever, if they kept their money with us, that would preserve their 9 years of service and their original hire date. If they came back in another position and worked a few more years, to vest, they could still do that. So we call them terminated members. They're not active anymore, but they still have money with us. And there's several people there. They would still get interest on those contributions at the same rate as active members while they have the money with us. But basically, if somebody worked 5 years and took their money out, they're no longer a member. They never existed in NHRS's view, for the purposes of retirement. If they came back and took another job, that would be their initial hire date, and they'd be subject to whatever the plan provisions were at the time of that hire date.
You can do
So,
it if you want to.
I worked 9 years, and now I'm gonna go do something else. I can take out what I put in, not my employer,
Correct.
whatever I put in, and I can reinvest that somewhere else. Or I can leave it there, and at some future date, I'll get a small pension.
No, not unless you return to service and got at least 10 years in. So, if somebody is not planning to come back, they worked 8 years and they own their own business now and they're never coming back, if they keep their money with us, they're almost treating it as a savings account.
Is there a time limit on that? Does the system eventually cash it out without you cashing it
There
out?
used to be, but that was repealed about 20 years ago by the
Okay.
legislature.
It's just if I'm if I'm not gonna get a small pension from that 9 years that I've put in, why would I leave the money with you?
For,
One second,
for a couple of reasons. The first reason is you think you might come back to work at some point, in which case you really want to keep your starting date and the conditions, and your contributions will have grown, so you will be, in that way you'll capture the 9 years of employer contributions as well.
Correct.
So if you have even a small chance of coming back to work for the state, it will be worth it to have an earlier start date and 9 years of accumulated contributions.
A great example of this is a teacher who becomes pregnant and takes 10 years off to raise their children and then comes back to teach. That's probably the most common example of how that occurs. It's not really DOT workers or folks like that, but especially within teachers, that it's in essence they can pause.
And compared to what we have now, that is new.
No, it
No,
is
that's
not.
been there all along.
That's been there since the beginning.
Just the definition. The definition wasn't in statute. So we were,
Vested.
yeah, we were working as if it were in statute almost, under the assumption that that was the case, but they're just putting it in there now so that we have something technical to work with. Yes, Kim, Representative here. If I recognize you, you can talk.
Thank you. So Representative Pearson, do I understand this correctly that there is no change on the vesting that we've been discussing? It's just putting it in there as to what defining it almost?
That would not be entirely accurate. The 10-year qualification for a benefit is no change. That is the presumption. Well, it's not a presumption because the qualifications for benefit at 10 years is in the statute. It's just not defined. It occurs like in A5, I think
It's referenced in both accidental disability and vested deferred retirement. It's you know, and possibly in the death benefits. It's referenced elsewhere in the statute where it's applicable, but it was never added to the definitions at the beginning. But that's how it's inferred and been.
And also too, since it's under
Utilized.
those three specific sections, under definitions would just make it in the entire document rather than, because you could interpret it that it only applies to the paragraphs in which it exists, which is part of the problem we had in the court case in 2012.
It also adds the 3-year
And that's the
stipulation.
second part.
That's
the
the second
3-year
part that
part
adds.
is new.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. So I asked Marty to provide me with some real life examples so that we could understand this. And so I know that you have a copy of this on.
One second, Kim. We're going to come back to that later.
Thanks.
Yep.
Yeah, we're going to chop this
We'll-
up
we'll get there.
section by section.
Yep.
So that is
Yeah,
So
go ahead.
would it be fair to say that this simply puts the assumed definition of vested among the definitions and then adds a new clause about
the 3-year part.
after 3 years, you can't mess with these two calculations?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. That was a back office ask of a judge to define it. Please define it. And I'm shocked that it took us a decade, frankly, to do it. So, but now's the time.
So after that, after we get past that part, we go into splitting group 1 from group 2.
Correct.
If you look at line 10, group 1, it's basically the definition that's in statute right now, but it's just siphoning off group 2 so that we can do something different with group 2.
Correct. That
Correct.
paragraph does have a request from retirement to remove line 21, that sentence slightly before and after 21, because it is irrelevant to group 1. It's a language cleanup thing. That's a specific thing to group 2, so it shouldn't be there.
Right.
That's at their request, so that's fine.
Yep. That makes sense.
It-
So what-
similarly to, if I can keep going, because we haven't ended the paragraph, it runs over into page 2.
Yes.
Similarly, line 1, permanent fireman, line 2, permanent policeman, does not need to be in a group 1 definition because they are not in group 1.
Right.
Same request from retirement.
And what was the purpose in line 25 for striking the compensation part?
Which page?
Page 2.
Oh, the
Com-
purpose of that is because you have, what it says is, in this paragraph, do what's in the next paragraph. Well, the next paragraph tells you to do it. So it's just completely redundant.
Okay.
That's
Have I mentioned the pay type too? Yeah, because on line, what is it, starts at the end of line 20, the reference to extra and special duty pay, that's specifically a pay available only to the Group 2
Group
members.
2,
So
right.
so a reference to extra and special duty pay and special duty pay is irrelevant to Group 1 because they're not,
Right.
under current law, they don't get it.
so that is a request to remove for a language cleanup on line 20.
Yep. Yeah, there's I mean there's a bunch of that. I'm not sure that we have to hit all of those necessarily. Line 27 on page 3, teachers, employees, that doesn't need to be in there. There's a few of them that
Sure.
that overlaps, but if any member of the committee would like to see the highlighted version from NHRS, we have one with all of those little extra special duty doesn't belong in here
yes.
because it's group 2 and there's
No
there's a few of
substantive
them.
change to to policy,
Right.
cost or procedure, just doing a better job separating group 1 and group 2 than I
Right.
did when I wrote it.
That was a quick analysis. There may be some other lurking references, but none of the stuff we flagged for Representative Pearson would affect the cost impact or the benefits for anybody.
Right. Yeah, no, I noticed them last night when I was going through it as well. Just things here and there. I'm not sure how much time the committee has spent looking at the document. Any questions on page 2? Yes, Representative True.
For me personally, what I hope to get from this meeting is not an understanding of the pension system, because we'd have to be here a little bit longer than my lifetime exists. What I need to know is what's different.
Sure.
That's what I want to the way it is now, because of the changes from 10 years ago, whenever.
Yep.
What's the difference? What's the cost? That's what I'm looking for.
Sure.
Starting on
Page 3.
That's the new stuff.
Yep. So page 3 is where the split really comes in, so that's why it's bold. So to separate group 1 and group 2, we have to add another paragraph to create the split. So in here, there was removal, because if you look at it literally word for word, references to teachers, the university teaching system doesn't need to be in there. That the end of line 10 needs to come out because we don't do that. Page 3.
Page 3.
Yep. Line 27 where it says employee teachers, that at the request of retirement will come out.
So just for clarification purposes too, what this does, Representative True, if you look at the first line on line 7, it says status prior to January 1st, 2013. That used to say January 1st, 2012. Okay, and then this whole paragraph, this whole explanation or definition of what calculates into their benefit is exactly what it was before we made the change to the new system. So it's reverting people for that year back to the old system of retirement pay, their old package, correct?
Their original package.
Their original
what
package.
they had
the-
when they were hired.
The one that they had when they were hired. So this just brings one year of people, the last year, the year that should be retiring right now, and
it's
says that they can retire right now with the package that they were promised when they started. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Yes, Carol. Sorry, Representative McGuire.
Yes, thank you. No, that's fine. We can be informal. I'm concerned about that because that is essentially telling everybody that was at the 9+ years in 2011 that they can retire right now. And if I were,
Except it doesn't, because the effective date of this is out, and it's actually going to require an additional year of service.
okay, so this is section 1. Take effect January 2024. So that we should expect on January 1st, 2024, a wave of retirements of people that were in this group.
Not necessarily. It gives them the option. It certainly doesn't tell them to do that, but it gives them the option, sure, as it would them just reaching the goal or the qualifications to retire.
Well, I happen to have been working at Lockheed when they implemented a change to the retirement system. And a significant fraction of people that were planning to work another year or 3 or 5 said, oh, if I work longer, I'm going to be, my benefit will be decreased, so I'm retiring right now. And we lost hundreds of people that month because they calculated that it would be better off to retire now than to work another year or two.
So this forces a year. They could actually leave right now. They would just leave under the current calculation. So there's an incredible incentive for them to give an additional year of service.
Yes.
And under the current statute, the value to stay is less than the change. So the carrot is there to say, if you keep going, it's worth more to stay than it used to be. And that's what we're trying to do is, as you're well aware, the longer someone works, the better it is for the system.
Thank you for pointing that out.
May I just say, so I totally agree with you that will act as that incentive that you've just described. But Representative McGuire's point was that next year, we're very likely to see that wave because people are, I think that's what's going to happen. The people will say, I can retire now with what has been promised, and they can't yank the rug out from underneath me once I've retired because that's locked in at that point. So I do think we have to anticipate that we'll see a wave.
Sure.
It's
And
not a guarantee. I
Right.
take it that you.
Well,
you're
and
correct
I
about-
I want to be careful not to isolate just that first year either, because the chart stretches out farther than just the
Oh,
first year.
well, sure.
And so you're incentivizing future years to stay on as well, when they might just opt to get out earlier. So we are, what this amendment does, I think, actually is systematically spreads out the risk of departure, rather than, I think we actually maybe run a higher risk of a larger departure
so
earlier.
in the we'll call it the Trotter bill, I forget the number, 549 or whatever it was, that would have happened because you would have instantaneously moved a decade's worth of people immediately to a retirement point where you would see a mass exodus. This goes in the other direction and says no, because we don't want that to happen. Now, keep in mind, as of February 1st, last week, the first group of folks could start to exit. We could have the mass exodus anyway. And there are probably some folks that are so burned out that they're not going to wait that year. But this is a substantial carrot to say, please keep working. And this is what we're going to, because of the abundance of things, but the majority being the labor market that we have. And also too, by forcing someone to work that additional year, it's better for the system because they're not withdrawing a benefit. They're actually putting money into the system. And that's the,
It's an incentive for
Yep.
them to keep working at this point.
Yep.
I just think
Sure. But at some point, regardless of where you were to draw a line, that's going to happen at some point anyway. So either we get them to stay the year or we do nothing and we see a mass exodus and we lose that
without
year.
the carrot, and from my perspective on this, without the carrot, they just leave sooner.
They just leave sooner.
They just leave sooner. So,
So on page 4, section D,
because just correct me if just for clarification purposes, Steve, this bill doesn't change the when somebody can retire in group 2. It just incentivizes them to stay longer if they want a higher pension.
correct.
So they can still retire when they were gonna be able to retire.
That's
They'll
right.
just take the package they're on now. They won't
Correct.
get the new package that's proposed in this.
That is
So-
why I wrote it
right.
this way. That is why the group of us that conferred did it this way, because what I did not want is to get into a similar situation that we're in right now with mandatory overtime where we're literally forcing people to work in a scenario that is really close to slave labor, by threatening people's jobs and whatnot, by forcing them to come in on this mandatory. I didn't want to exacerbate that by saying, we're going to force you
you.
to do a year.
Right.
We're going to ask you, this is what you get in return.
I just want to make sure everybody on the committee understands we're not offering to allow people to leave sooner.
Correct.
They're able to leave when they were already able to leave, but we're just trying to incentivize them
That
to
is
kick around a
absolutely
little bit
correct.
longer.
Yep.
So that language follows through to the bottom of page 4, correct?
Yeah, paragraphs A and B repeated C and D
Right.
as the separation of group 1 and group 2. At a request, lines 12 and 28 contain the word teacher. They shouldn't be in there. That will come out because there's no need of that.
Yeah, there's a, yeah, on line 12 there's a few of them. So any questions from any member of the committee so far on that concept? Because now we're going to go into final compensation.
Average.
Yes, Representative Chu.
So with what we were just discussing, trying to encourage people to work a little longer, can somebody give me, what does a little longer mean?
So to you, I mean, I could probably use the what you
Do you want-
use as an example here. So
Do we want to wait until we just get to the chart to answer that question? Would that be easier?
I mean, I can answer. It's on his mind. It's fine. So what happens? What happens is that if I earned a $50,000 benefit, right? For that year, I take $50,000 out of the system. But if I work, not only am I not taking $50,000 out, I have to contribute based on my salary. So instead of removing $50,000 out of the system, I'm putting $12,000 in. It's a full switcheroo, if you will. If you were a fan of the National League, double switcheroo. But so that has a financial. It's a substantial financial difference because I'm not drawing out, but I'm actually contributing. I can't give you a rock hard example other than a hypothetical 50,000 because every single person that's in the pension system has a different salary, has different years of service.
One
Yes.
second, Steve. Yeah, go ahead, Carol.
What might be simpler is that if you retire right now, you will get 2.1% of your average final compensation
2.4.
times years of service. 2.4.
2.4.
2.4. If you wait a year until this goes into effect, you will receive 2.5 times your average final salary times your years of service. So you'll have not only one more year of service, you will also get
A tenth of a
about a
percent.
10%,
Tenth of a percent per year.
per year. Well,
So,
so you will get a bonus in your pension, which is, like 4%, a 4% increase in your pension, plus an extra year's service.
so
it-
1 year, Chris, I think was what you were asking. We're incentivizing them to stay an extra year.
And the cost we'll get to later?
Yes,
Yes.
correct.
Now, as far as incentivizing, it's a little bit more than it's a minimum of a year that they would have to do. Beyond that, the incentive still continues
Right.
for them to continue working. So I don't want to I don't
Right.
want this framed into like just a 1 year framework. It goes beyond that, but it requires a minimum of 1 year
Right, to achieve it.
to achieve it. Correct.
And maybe people will feel a little less burnt out if they're getting paid better. Who knows?
People's internal value of what they contribute to their employer matters. I mean, there's been plethora of studies involving raises, the concept of raises, the concept of value, employee production based on how they feel they're valued in an organization. And I can tell you, at least in that category right now, in my 20 plus years of being in the services in New Hampshire, I don't think it's ever been lower. It is just almost rock bottom right now. And this would go a tremendously long way in improving that.
Without any further objection, I'll move on. We'll move on to average final compensation. Really, on page 5 is where our stuff comes in.
So at a request of the retirement system, pretty much the second half of paragraph A, which is lines 1 through 5, they want gone because it doesn't apply to group 1. So that's a request of the retirement system.
That makes sense.
It's inappropriate language for that.
Yep.
So it leaves group 1 with only the one sentence on the bottom of page 4.
Correct. And that matches, frankly, the original sentence that existed from 1967 to 2010.
Yeah.
Which was literally one sentence.
Excellent.
For group 2, that language does matter. So that's why it is in bold, lines 6 through 14. It is a repeat of what
What was in
what's
statute?
literally in statute.
It's word for word.
With the only difference being the 1 year as we begin down that road. Otherwise, it's verbatim as to what it was. Now, this this is part of a compromise because it's leaving in a change that did not occur when these people were hired. And that involves an anti-spiking provision. So the anti-spiking provision remains. We all are well, or at least Representative McGuire is well aware that the anti-spiking provisions were, for the most part, put into place because they were needed. And what we don't want to do is upset that. So those, even though realistically they should be taken out for folks because they were not enacted until 2009, that is a compromise to prevent a repeat of problems
It's
that
a
we had in
reasonable
the past.
compromise, yeah.
I'd like to mention that when we looked into spiking at various occasions over the last 15 years at least, we found that most people who worked a lot of overtime in their last few years also worked a lot of overtime in their earlier years. So this would not affect anybody who consistently worked overtime. It would only
Correct.
affect people who said, gee, I can jack up my pension by working a lot in the last year or two. I mean,
Yep.
one of my personal friends was a fireman in San Francisco, and in his last year of service, he told us, well, I won't be seeing you for the next year because I'm going to be working all the overtime and extra shifts that I can pull because it was going to spike his pension.
Right.
And it did, in fact, give him a substantial benefit because that pension system allowed it. So he got, I think, an extra $15,000 a year by basically working full-time 24/7 his last year of service.
So
And we don't want that to happen.
Correct.
It's unfair to the people, and it's unfair to both the people who pay for the pension and the people that are trying to manipulate it.
Representative Chu?
I said it before in committee, and it's not in jest. Speak to me as if I were a child. Speak to me as if I were a golden retriever or a pet turtle. I have no idea what spiking is.
So
I can give you a phenomenal example.
Go ahead, Steve.
Okay. So you work 17 years in your job, and you look at the way that the system used to function and say, hey, you know what? For the next 3 years, if I just do 100 hours a week, I will inflate my pension to a number that really doesn't really jive with the prior 17 years I worked. And that's what a lot of people did. And the divorce rate was horrible. This led to burned out people. It led to folks that became kind of horrible workers because they were, in the interest of greed, I guess you would call it, or the interest of gaming the system, they just never went home. All they did was work. And what happens with that is that, yes, they contribute into the system for that time period based on an elevated salary. But the way that the pension system functions, it's not the investments over time, the way the system works, it can't handle that. So it's detrimental to the corpus of the fund as a whole. So when they looked at this back a decade, 14 years ago, in conjunction with the retirement system, they said, okay, this is dangerous to the health of the system, and we need to put some things in place to prevent this from occurring further. That's recognized. One of the things that, for those that care about this system, we certainly don't want to see the system fall apart. We don't want to see this system default. And the anti-spiking provisions that were put in place, frankly, work. The health of the system has gotten substantially healthier just in the last 4 years. We've increased our assets by several billion. So there's no desire to make a change to go back to something we know is hurtful.
The other issue with that kind of spiking is you end up with people retiring with outrageous looking salaries, and they make the newspaper, and a lot of people assume that all retirees are collecting $150,000 a year, when it's only those who manipulated the system to get more extra.
Two things, Mr. Chair. So anti-spiking is somewhere on the bottom of 4 and top of 5.
Anti-spiking is throughout the document. There's several other things that occur too. This just happens to be one of those provisions.
He was just he was just saying that the language is still in there, just don't exist. But what keeps the system from allowing them to do that is in the document.
And in testimony, he said, well, we're going to take out teachers. I haven't been taking out teachers. Are we looking at another amendment that's going to take out a lot
Well,
of
yes,
these
we
words?
have to have
it's a
one more.
cleanup.
It won't change any of the language that
It's just
affects
removing
benefits.
teachers from this because
Yeah,
it doesn't
so-
apply to them.
Correct.
Well, removing teachers from some of the group 2 language and removing and vice versa. It went both ways.
And as retirement stated, that doesn't change the concept, the substance, the cost. It's a language cleanup. That's all it is.
It really probably wouldn't have any practical
If it was left
problem.
in there, it wouldn't do
It
anything
wouldn't do
because it
anything.
just doesn't
It would just
apply.
be it would just be messy.
Yep, that's all.
And that bothers Marty, so we don't want to do that. We
There
want
are,
to keep it
there are
clean.
no group 2 teachers and no group 1 firemen or policemen, so.
Yep,
it's-
that's all that is.
Although the teachers might come up with an extra duty, something.
It's called something else if you're a teacher.
Yes.
Extracurricular or instructional pay.
Yeah.
Exactly. So the paragraph C is just a renaming of a paragraph because we can't have 2 paragraph Bs. The paragraph D, it goes along with the consistency of moving that date forward a year at a time. In paragraph 2, one of the things that I removed here, or we removed here, I keep saying I shouldn't, is I've never been comfortable with that line that's crossed out because if you started on July 1 of 11, January 1 of 12 is 6 months later. It's almost impossible for that scenario to exist. I don't like it. I think it's confusing. And in the interest of having a firm line in the sand, see ya. So that should conclude page 5.
Yep.
Page 6 is, so A5, paragraph A5 in the statute, which is predominantly what page 6 is about, has to do with qualifications of, when you're allowed to earn your pension. So there's no policy, no language changes at all. It's just a date change to start the process of transitioning people back. No other language has changed in A5 whatsoever. Until we get to Part D, which is on page 7, this infamous chart that everybody has nightmares about, both from an employer, employee, and retirement system standpoint. So the chart, the change in the chart is simply to take the chart apart. That's it. It doesn't change anything in the chart, but it takes it from 4 categories to 10, because if you're going to annually move someone, if you don't do that, then you're moving 2 years of people disproportionately. The line 20, which is less than 4 years, would be the movement of 4 people simultaneously, and therefore one group would only have to work X number of years and the rest of them would have to work more. So this is just an equity thing. If you're going to move people annually, you have to take the chart apart to do that.
So this separates the transition from 2 to 1 year groups.
Correct. That's all it does. Yep. The rest of the math, all
Well,
the
and
rest of it's
the
the
first
same.
group from 4 years down to individual.
Well, the
was
the 4-year
originally
group
4 years
just
and
is
then-
taken apart into
yeah,
4, but
into
it
4.
goes. It just makes it 1 year increments is all it does. Let's see.
Yeah, and you have to. I mean, you really have to do that once you start pulling them out, 1
Yep.
year at a time, because we're going to go 1 year at a time. So you got to
Exactly.
do that. You got to
would
do
be
it that way.
impossible. There's no other way to do it.
Yeah.
That would be. And again, we're supposed to be writing law here, where regular folks can read this and kind of get an understanding. So if it was written into some bizarre legalese goo, Marty would be getting phone calls all the time it's bad enough they're asking for interpretations as it is. I don't want to make that worse. So this just simplifies that for folks that go onto the internet and try to figure this massive
They're still going to call, but that's okay.
massive document out. Sure. So where we get into a little bit more substantive changes here is now in 100A6, which is the pension cap. The pension cap was instituted in 2009. Prior to that, there was no cap of any type. Page 8,
26, line 26. Or
starting on line
above,
13,
a little bit lower.
which is section A100, RSA 100A6. So the first part mirrors the problem that I had with the prior paragraph in that if we're going to have a definitive line in the sand, then it needs to just read that way. When you get to the second part, what we're looking at here is adhering to the idea of penalties or calculations that didn't exist when these folks started. The lesser of 85% of a member's average final compensation, or 120,000, did not exist until 2009. So this just basically, in the interest of keeping a definitive line of July 1 of 11, puts the little line right there. The folks that were hired before July 1 of 01 that never had a cap of any type will continue under that realm. So it basically puts a pension cap into 3 categories. Prior to 01, 01 to 11, and 11 on.
So the people we're dealing with, the transitional tenure, they're getting a $5,000
Right.
bump in their
Now,
cap.
in $120,000 in 2009 equals $166,385 today. If you look at the 38.6% inflation for this district over that time. So the 125 is really just because I like round numbers and it seems like a round number. So by rights, if you wanted to make things whole, it would be 166. $166,000 pension to me is outrageous. So I'm not going to make the argument that, but I want you to understand though, that with the rest of this is essence is somewhat of a compromise because it's reducing real dollar value.
Yeah.
I understand the 125,000. But you're deleting the lesser of 85% of the members' average final compensation.
Only for folks in the
Transition.
2011 group. The new hires, that is a condition that existed when they were hired, and that remains in paragraph C, which is the 2011 and on folks.
So that someone in the transition could work long enough to get 100% of their average final compensation.
Well, that is the maximum cap. You cannot go beyond 100% of that.
It doesn't say so.
It says it can't exceed 125.
And there's a hard number at 125,000.
I get that,
Yep.
but I think that if you're going to be essentially changing that 85% to 100%,
You should
I
write
think
the
you should
100%.
leave it there because I that is a policy choice.
That's true. There's no reason why, if I think according to that language, if their benefit was going to be 85, that they couldn't just give them 125 if they wanted to. It's not capped at 100%.
I'm not entirely sure what you're asking here. So,
My point is that 85% of final compensation
yeah,
is a limit of one sort, and then there's a hard dollar
yep,
amount.
correct. Except,
All right, if you want to say that someone who has been a long service employee can continue to earn up to 100% of their final salary,
gotcha.
then say so.
Okay, so
Yeah,
change
it
the
should be in
85 to
there.
100.
I think
Yeah.
that would be more appropriate
we'll look
than
at
just
that.
eliminating it.
Okay. By all means.
Yeah. And just to clarify, under the 2.5% multiplier for group 2, the original tier A folks, excuse me, once somebody works 40 years at 2.5% a year, they've accrued 100% of their average final compensation. We've had some chiefs who've worked beyond that, but so if it was 85%, that would be 34 at 2.5%. That's 34 years. So that's how someone could get to 100% of AFC is by working, extremely long.
And I certainly don't want
they
to say,
haven't.
hey, you worked 34 years, bye-bye. Again, encouraging people to work longer is better for the system. Shutting them off at 34 years is a bad idea.
And I think there are other provisions that say that after you've worked 40 years, you stop contributing to the
And so
pension.
does your municipality.
No, actually, I was just going to say that the member doesn't contribute after they've maxed out. We still ding the town.
You do dig
Yeah,
the town.
yeah.
Wow. I was under the, oh, my
Is
town
that,
was
is that
under
only
impression
for the
they didn't do that.
UAAL? Is that just because that exists? Would you stop doing that otherwise?
Well, there's nothing in the statute that would allow us to not collect employer contributions on the salary of active members. So regardless of whether they have 1 year of service or 50.
Okay, that makes
Yeah,
sense.
and leaving in the percent of final compensation, but setting it at 100 would mean that members with 40 years of service would continue to be eligible to not contribute anymore. Otherwise, if it's just a flat dollar amount, there's no reason to do so.
Sure.
That makes sense.
Okay, I get you there. So the other thing that's here is that in retirement provided this chart in their explanation page as to what a 1.25% annual increase in the cap looks like, just so that you could understand the hard math without having to do it yourself. What we have seen, and especially in reference to $120,000 equaling 166 today, is that if we don't have some kind of mechanism to adjust that number, those dollars become old. And this is at 1.25%, we are nowhere near inflation, nowhere near it. But at least this provides a mechanism for it to move forward. It also prevents the pension cap from also being a ceiling eventually, where if you get to that point, go, hey, I'm at 125, 15, 18 years from now, see ya, I got to go. I'm not working for free. So it prevents that from happening as well. But just keep in mind that they ran these numbers out to 2036 and you're still not at 166,000. You're still not even at today's dollars. So this is just,
Any further inflation adjustment would take place in the compensation line.
sure, or if this really fell behind drastically in the future, the legislature certainly has the right to come in and adjust it. They would not be restricted from doing that at all. So, but it's just a mechanism to prevent a stagnant dollar is all it is.
Any questions from the committee? Chris?
I feel so sorry for you guys for having me on your committee.
Not at all. I welcome the questions, Representative True. Seriously.
You're brave enough to ask them, and there are probably lots of other people that are saying, I wonder what that means,
Yeah.
but don't
Yep.
dare to ask.
Are we trying to work in some proof that to prevent inflation from weakening your dollar? Is it? We can't do that.
No, that's not it. Go ahead, Steve.
Not at all. It's just saying, so, and I'll give you a real world example. In 1994, there was he's a Manchester battalion chief, and I'll only use this as a reference because it was on the front page of the Union Leader. He earned a $25,000 a year pension, and that the Union Leader framed it as outrageous. If the poverty level in New Hampshire is 44,000, my property taxes are 10 grand. $25,000 pension now I would be in a heap of trouble. So as the dollar moves and the value of the dollar changes through inflation, anytime you have something that's a hard number, every year that number becomes less and less of a value. If there had been a pension cap introduced in 1994 of $25,000, the legislature would have had to have amended that multiple times because you would have just had mass retirements when people hit the ceiling.
So
Yeah.
for clarification, again, we didn't have a pension cap.
It didn't exist,
And
period.
then we instituted one back in 2009.
2009, correct.
And so once we instituted that pension cap, it locked the pension in time. It froze it in time. And so no matter how much inflation happens, you could only get 125. This is just saying that as the years go on, the cap is going to be somewhat controlled by what we're paying them, right? So I mean, they're not just going to be able to get a higher pension just because the cap goes up. We'd have to be paying them more for them to get a larger pension to reach that cap limit. It just says that the dollar tomorrow isn't going to be worth what it is today. So the cap should be a little bit higher, so that they can get a pension that's in line with the value of the work that they did.
And
The-
in line with their pay.
Right, with their pay.
The procedure used here, and I asked OLS about this because I'm like, is this worded correctly? Is this something that can be done in statute? And I was assured that there are multiple places in statute that have annual ratchetings of things. This is not unique in any way, and it's
It's going to
something
save
that
us a
they
lot
deal
of
with.
headaches in the future.
It just saves us from
It's gonna-
having
It's going
to
to save us some headaches.
exactly.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
This new wording is saying that the maximum pension you can get is 125?
Yes, that would be the maximum
for
pension.
this year, and then next year in January 1 of 2025, sorry, it would go to 126,563, which is 1.25% above 125,000.
Got it.
Yep.
Thank
Now
you.
keep in mind, every year of service someone works, they get 2.5%. This is half of that. So at some point in the rabbit and hare race, it's possible to have a collision that would have you leave. What we're saying is we don't want the tortoise to not move, period.
And once again, Chris, just for clarification purposes, almost nobody gets up that high at this point. Like it's
Yeah, Marty can
very,
touch that. Very few
very,
people
very
touch
rare
that.
for that to happen. The average ones are way, way less. It's controlled by what the municipality is paying. So that's within a town's purview as to say what they want to pay, because the employee is paying in at a rate, the employer's paying at a rate. They're the ones paying in, and so they're the ones who are setting what the person's going to get together. We're not setting that for them.
Yes, some, the way the cap is written now, you had to be hired after 7/1 of 09 and not vested by 1/1 of 12 to hit it. So there are a few people retiring now who are getting pensions in excess of 120,000. I look quickly at the list, just over 125. There's currently 39 retirees receiving a pension over 125 right now. I'm sure there's a few between 120 and 25, but those are people who were hired and vested prior to the effective of the 120 cap. So
And
And they
out
are
of
probably people who retired at a high rate of pay and worked for 40 years or so.
yeah, it's primarily group two. I think there's a school superintendent in the list as well, or somebody who retired as a teacher. So I'm assuming they're a superintendent. Maybe they were principal. But again, it's all your pensions are based on years of service and your average final salary. So it depending on people who have a lot of service tend to be at the top of their profession and their community and are among the highest paid or the highest paid individuals in those towns. So that that's the math is the math. Nobody gets any deals to get those pensions. They earn them under the current law.
yeah, so
Yes.
if you don't want it in your town, just don't pay your people that much.
So I have a question for you, Marty. Of the 39 pensioners above this, how many retirees exist? How many thousands of retirees do we have, to give you an idea of numbers?
Yeah, we've got about 42,000 benefit recipients, and what I crunch every year for our slides and other handouts is the percentage of retirees earning a benefit in excess of 75,000. I mean, I could slice and dice other levels if you need me to next week, but that's less than 2% of the 42,000 total benefits paid. 94% of people receiving a benefit now, it's under 50.
So just to put the framework, 39 people in 42,000. There's a lot of zeros before you hit a number after that decimal place.
And that was the choice of the municipality that
But-
hired them.
Yep. So,
So-
but again, just to prevent, when you have the opportunity to fix a couple of things when you're in here, when you're going to open this statute up, it's time to do like language, again, in reference to language changes, definition improvements, things like that. If you're going to do it, just fix the things need to be fixed now. So we're not coming back next term going, hey, let's do some language cleanups. Let's just get it out of the way now. And I think
that
the
clarify?
stagnant pension cap is one of those
I mean,
things.
you might, it's not a question of whether you like it or not. You might not like it, but do you get it?
So, there are people who have an exorbitant pension payout.
There's a couple, less than, you couldn't put them all on a school
Yes.
bus. Yep,
The-
and that's
But
what
this
triggered.
cap-
Chris, those people are the ones who got exorbitant pay when they were working.
But this cap says that won't happen again?
Correct.
It's,
That's
it's-
exactly what that cap says. It cannot happen again.
Okay.
and part of that came through the spiking that we were talking about earlier. You know, like they would put in that extra time at the end to really drive it up. Yes, Kim.
So with a tier 2 member who before this bill was having a multiplier of 0.021, now has 0.025, and they're extended from 24 years to 25 years. And the difference,
Where
Wait,
are you
wait,
looking, Kim?
where are you? Where?
I'm
Leave it-
trying,
You're back on the chart.
yeah, I'm on my chart. I'm trying to apply to understand if I thoroughly understand what this did. What this will
Yes.
do.
So, well, we haven't gotten there yet. I think it'll be clearer when we get to page. Well, the next one, right?
Well,
Yeah, it's going to start kicking in the next
the
page. It
the
should explain.
boilerplate part kicks in
Right.
right at the bottom
And
of
you'll
page
see
8.
how it affects the chart.
So the boilerplate, the legalese part, you know, I got more Roman numerals than an Athens government building right here. But what this
But it's the same every paragraph.
it is. And what
It's-
this does is it says every year we're going to transition people back into the system to which they were hired under. That is how we make them work the additional year, is it with effective dates. So annually, every January 1, a new group of people now officially has the carrot dangled in front of them if they choose. And like I said before, in the event that they're burned out or something happens or they move, whatever, they just have to go. They'll just have to go under the current math formula instead of the incentivized one.
So if you look at, let's just go to,
Just pick one. Yeah.
yeah, just pick one. Part 7.
That's the first one.
You'll see
Top
that
of
there,
page 9.
yeah, top of page 9, line 3, it'll say subsequent changes effective January 1st, 2025. So on January 1st, 2025, this will go into effect. And before that, in fact, this is one of the interesting things about this is it amends itself like 9 times.
Yep.
And so you got to keep up with it as it goes along because every year it changes. This document changes itself every year. So on 2025, all right, the effective date that we started with, which was 2013,
2013.
if you look down on line 5, that every time 2013 shows up as the effective date, now it's going to be 2014. So at that point, the group on line 27 of the chart, line 28.
9.
Yeah. Is going to
It's
go
actually
from,
line 5 on page 8 is completely deleted.
yeah,
goes
just gets deleted. And that, yeah, then those people would go back to the 2.5% multiplier. And then the next year, it'll get pushed back a year. And that next line on the chart will go back to 2.5%. And then the next year, the next group will go to 2.5%. It just keeps rolling it back year after year after year.
Until in 33, the chart
It's
is gone.
it's obsolete,
And
and we get
then
rid of the language.
the
altogether.
language reverts to, instead of having a term of vested, it just says you were hired before July 1 of 11 or you were hired after.
So you'll see that on page 10, starting on line 25. You'll start to see that where it says any reference to 2021. That's because that's the last group's effective date. So that's where it will be. At that point, the statute will all say effective 2021, and then we're going to come in and get rid of that and change the language to who commenced service on 2011. So it'll essentially split everybody into 2 groups: the people who started serving before 2011 and the people who started serving after 2011. Does that make sense?
And the final one is actually only a 6-month move because it goes from January to July. So it's a consistent procedure annually across the board, with no surprises, because it's literally a paragraph repeat 8 times. They found that to reference it using the sections in Roman numerals this way made this an 11-page document instead of a 50-page document.
And much easier for us to follow.
And much easier for us to follow. Yep.
I'd like to say that I really appreciate that it is self-amending and it includes the entire transition group. So that everybody knows that we're taking care of the whole group with this bill. We're not just
Yep.
taking care of this year's problem.
Because what'll
Exactly.
happen is we're just going to keep coming back and
No, yeah,
just end
exactly.
the speaker was very clear. He looked at me and said, can this problem be solved? And I said, yes. And he said, can you do it? And I said, I think so. And this solves the problem. And we're done with this. It's just going to take a little time. Now, as far as the money part of this, we referenced the Trotter bill as the maximum amount because that instantly moved everyone back with no concessions. The fiscal note has dropped on that, and it is lower than even what you, because
where are we
it
at?
was brought in at 249. It's actually 229
229 million
million
before
if you did it
concessions.
before any concessions.
The
and if
speaker
you
will be
just
very happy.
instantly did it. So as far as what those concessions bring to the financial part of that, they have to run an actuarial on this after.
Is it so? Just possibly under 200.
You know, just when you look at it just sort of as back of the envelope math, and there's some changes a little bit in this bill compared to the, I'll refer to it as a Trotter bill because I don't recall the number. I think it was 525. You know, so in all of our brains, it seems like it is, but actuarial math is a little bit like particle physics. You know, the laws of gravity and things don't quite apply the same way,
Right.
or are non-existent there. So I'd be remiss to put a number or even an estimate on it at this point.
Sure.
But
We did, you know,
But it should definitely be less, the funding on line 28 of page 11.
It'll be less than
Should be enough to cover it.
that's what it feels like in human terms.
And-
but
and-
Fine, and so we will,
Yeah.
I think we should leave that alone and let the actuaries actuaries go to work.
Well, yeah, no, the good news is though, by the time, if we can get this through the House the first time, by the time it gets to finance, we should have that number and they can amend this to match that number if they need to.
Or
Right.
they could just put a little extra in.
Or
to
they can just
start.
put a little bit
especially in
yeah.
a down stock market.
Right. I'm
Dep-
not opposed to that.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it's not, even though the concept is a flat fund, the reality is that market changes later, right? As the market improves, this number could drop based on market improvement and all that. So,
Right.
you know,
Just
it's-
like the rest of the system does.
Right. So the actuaries I'm not going to devalue what they do for a career by referring to them as financial weathermen, but they kind of are in a way because they have to make assumptions on some things in the future based on a best guess.
Right.
And as we have seen in especially the last 4 years, the actuaries have become more and more conservative in their thinking with attaching a little bit higher cost to things so that we kind of almost guarantee we don't get into trouble.
Right. Well, and the
Which is-
difference with
which
this
is
though
great.
is we're funding this. We're not
Right.
sending
The
this
state-
back to the municipalities.
Correct.
This is coming right out of the general fund. So
Correct.
it's a little bit different that way too, as far as like the rate adjustment would potentially happen, like in comparison with the rate of return, right?
Yeah. Yeah, to the extent that if this went through at a $25 million a year appropriation for 10 years, and some of that, and that total amount wasn't needed to pay the benefits accrued here, that would be what's called an actuarial gain, and it would lower employer contribution rates, you know, in Group 2 for all, both state and local.
Right,
To the
so-
extent that anything over, you know, well, you know, and
So if it's
again,
over the-
assuming all the other assumptions are met, any extra money over, you know, anything in the 25 million that is over what's needed to fund this.
Is a tax reduction to
is
the
a gain,
municipalities.
You know, and it saves you interest in the long run and,
Yeah.
you know, et cetera.
So that's an added benefit. If it comes in cheaper, we get to send a bit of a tax breakdown to the municipalities.
Yeah.
That's not bad.
Which they won't complain about.
Which they won't complain about, neither will I.
Complain it's not big enough.
Yeah. So Chris, it's the opposite of 28A.
You know, actually, it is the opposite.
It's the
So-
opposite.
I mean, that's the gist of this. Like I said before, as we explained in the first presentation, this is how it was when we first explained it. So there's nothing hidden in here. There's no secret agenda. There's no weird Roman numeral that no one knows about. This is extraordinarily straightforward. It is exactly as was presented, and it does nothing more or nothing less than what is written.
That
So,
was my impression. I've gone through it line by line and
In
matched it
retirement,
up with
you know,
with the book,
it's-
and it's exactly the same.
Marty's job is if there was something that
One
was
second, Steve.
there.
Yes, go.
No, so besides the cleanup, the policy changes that are made here are to, in a phased way, delete that table of lesser retirement benefits and change um, the average, the limit on maximum pension for people in that group to 100% of final compensation rather than 85%. So that is two separate changes to the possible pension of people in that group. One is the deletion of lines, one by one, and the other is the increase in the maximum final pension as a percent to a higher percentage of their pay.
And there's one other. The one other is that with the maximum benefit,
The inflation adjustment.
inflation adjustment would hold true to all folks from 2001 forward.
Okay.
So
And-
that would be that's
And
the
the vested.
only change for someone hired July 1 of 11 would be the pension caps. Because
All right.
I don't-
And also, thank you for reminding me.
Yeah.
The policy on page 1, line 6 and 7, that is not reducing the calculations after 3 years of service.
correct.
So that's a policy.
That is a policy change. Yep.
Okay. I think we need
And
to.
I hope my explanation as to why I feel that needs to be there, you understand, whether you agree with it or not, but you at least understand the methodology as to why.
No, I understand it, and I just want to make it, I mean, this is big enough that it's important to separate the policy decisions from the language cleanup to implement those decisions. So we're making a decision on the maximum final compensation. We're deleting the chart phase by phase, and we're limiting changes after 3 years of service.
Right.
Correct.
Plus, changing the language to agree with those things.
Right.
But
Chris. It's a lot, man. We've been looking at this a lot longer.
It's like you're speaking French to me. The number,
Yes.
250, is
Well,
not gonna,
230.
oh, it is gonna change.
230
Yeah,
max.
there was the fiscal note on the Trotter bill just hit a couple of days ago, and it was estimated at 249. It's actually 229 maximum. This is going to be less than that.
But that's before we phase it out, right? So what as Steve was saying before, as you keep people on another year, they're paying in, they're not taking out. So that 229 is everybody jets right away and joins the system. Because we have added concessions, it's going to drop that price. So that was the question I was asking, is it potentially less than 200? I think it is potentially. We don't have a hard number on that, so we don't know, but finance can take care of that component of it. They'll have the number by then. They can look at it and make a determination based off of the expense of the bill. Our main concern here, our primary concern, because we don't have that number specifically, is whether or not the policy itself is right and good, and we think that it should move forward. And then if we can get the House to agree with that, finance can really get fine, and then you'll have another chance to speak to whether or not you like the expense of it, because it's going to go to finance and come back.
The other point is that the other policy decision is that this be paid from the general fund rather than from employer contributions, which for Group 2 are largely from municipalities.
Yeah.
So this says that we will pay the approximate cost on a 10-year flat funded, which will, first of all, rather than the method we usually use, it will get more of the cost into the system earlier, which is more effective. And it will make sure that the municipalities don't have to pay anything for this change.
Right. No downshifting, because thou shalt not.
So there may be some money not spent, maybe, and if it's not spent of the 229, that would go back to the town.
It would go back to the
Yep.
towns.
It would go into a rate
Used
reduction.
to
Right, right.
recalculate what
Yes,
they pay.
Yeah, exactly.
And two things, if I may, so I can shut my mic off. I'm sure maybe later on in committee, we'll go over those policy changes and explain them all again. To somebody, say like, not a really brilliant first grade person, but somebody who's an average first grader will be able to explain those policies, so they could explain it to somebody else.
Yes, either Carol or I will do our best to come up with some language that's accessible.
Thank you, and I did have one more. This solves the problem. What's the problem that we just solved?
So the problem, okay, so
Well
in,
said.
so I will say that the problem, this is both a, in my opinion, Representative Schmidt, a constitutional problem and a moral problem in the sense that Article 23 of the New Hampshire State Constitution says you don't go backwards. Retroactive law is injurious, it's harmful, and it shouldn't be done. That was added in 1784. So, like, in the way that I interpret the changes that happened in 2011, the way that the majority of the folks that were affected by this look at this, they say, hey, I took a job, you told me what was going on, and then 9 years later, you made a change to folks. But accept that instead of just making a change for new hires, you went backwards retroactively 10 years. That to me is a retroactive change of law, and it flies in the face of Article 23.
Yep.
And the changes we're making here aren't going back in time?
The changes we're making here are fixing what I interpret and others interpret as a violation of the Constitution. This undoes the violation.
And technically, we're repealing statute, which we do frequently. So there are laws that are already in place. This is essentially repealing things that were put into. So whereas the law that was put in place before retroactively injured people, we're now going back to that law and we're repealing it step by step. We're getting rid of it. Does that make sense?
And are we close to wrapping up?
Yes.
You think?
Very.
You think so, huh? No. I'm not in any hurry.
Yeah. Okay. I don't have to go anywhere, Chris.
I
consider that in
I
check.
do, but
Steve has to go. And so does Marty.
I have to go to work, but I truly do keep coming with the questions. I don't want you to leave here with not understanding something if now's the opportunity when you have.
I have until 3. So
Because there's another gentleman at that table who handed out a very nice
yeah,
sheet.
he's next.
Yeah,
yes.
okay, yeah, okay.
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, you can get out of here. I don't care.
All right. Thank you, Representative True, for your
Procedurally,
Procedurally.
you're taking this down to OLS to get it revised, correct? Or
Yeah.
are you, do you want someone else to, since you're not here?
I can do it, Steve.
I can do it right now. If I go down there right now. So just for clarification, you're asking for things that should have been in bold to be put in bold.
I would like to see them in bold.
Gotcha. The cleanup language that was this is from Marty.
Everything that you
with
got from
the highlighted
NHRS.
parts.
Yep.
We've got that figured out.
We're changing 85% to
The
100%.
85 to 100, I've got that. And a couple of more. You want the last 4 pages in bold as well.
I want last 4 pages in bold so that when it goes to the committee again, that they know that those are actual changes and
Yep.
not in statute. Yeah.
I know this is in common, but you're not having a hearing on this. Are we gonna be able to speak or ask questions on this bill? Because I recognize some conflicts that at least I'd like to have addressed and have, Committeeman Pearson, Representative Pearson, explain it. 'Cause I
I'm
think,
I'm amenable to that.
on page 4, again, just like clarification, on line 4, on page 4, it says, for Group 2 members who have not attained vested status prior to January 1, 13, the full base rate compensation paid as determined by the employer, plus compensation over base pay, then it goes and states what the compensation is. But then if you go back to line 14, it says earnable compensation shall not include compensation for
Thank you.
extra
Yeah,
and
I meant-
special duty for members commenced service on or after July of 2011.
Yeah, go ahead,
So
Steve.
If I was hired in 2012, I would fall under the first paragraph.
No.
But under the second paragraph, I wouldn't.
You would not, because you would not be vested prior to January 1 of 13 if you were hired in 2012.
But no, it say, the first paragraph says
Mhm.
members who have not attained vested status
Right.
prior to 13. So if I,
Correct.
So it covers you if you're in 12.
say that again?
No, no, it doesn't, because you did not attain vested status.
No, that's what I'm saying. It's never mind. You go ahead.
So
Too many
what that,
cooks.
the line 2, the earnable compensation who commenced service after July 1 of 11, that's already statute. That's not a change. That's already in the RSA. So there's no change there. For the first,
So that January on line 5, you're going to be changing that date, the vested date, every
Every year.
Annually.
revision,
Every year.
Yep.
so that it'll start, if you're hired after July 2011, you do not get to include extra and special pay, period, ever.
so to translate this out of a vested world into a hiring world, the first sentence says for group 2 members hired prior to January 1 of 2003. In essence, that's what that says.
One of them's vested, the other's hired.
Because that's what, if it takes 10 years to vest, then that's January 1 of 03 is
Right.
is a vesting of January 1 of 13.
Does that make sense?
It's the same thing, just said 2 different ways. Without getting into the weeds about turning 65 and all the little tiny things that can exist, but
Sure,
for the
yeah.
most part, that's what that is. So paragraph 2 is not a change. That's already in statute.
I'm looking at line 4, that whole
Yep.
paragraph.
Yeah,
So
because
that-
that's
Yep, that reads members who were hired prior to January 1 of 03. And then next year it would be January 1 of 04, and then January 1 of 05.
because they need 10 years to get vested. And then line 14 has to do with when they start working, not when they're vested.
I hate the term, I wish we didn't use the term vested status,
Yeah.
but because of a couple of rare conditions that exist under the retirement rules, right now we're stuck with it.
Mhm.
I would prefer to just have a hiring date.
Does
but
that does that make sense to you?
He's still looking
It
puzzled.
does, but it's,
Yeah.
reading it, it seems complicated.
Yeah, reading it seems complicated. It could because of technical things with how we have to write it. That line 4, as Steve said, could read for those who
Hired after.
well,
03.
yeah, commenced service on or after
January 1 of
January 1 of 2003.
And I wish it could, but that
Yeah.
involves military time, Peace Corps time, turning 60. There's other little things in there that.
But it
'Cause
does
I
it does
absolutely-
cover the concern that you have. People are covered.
All right, basically think of the first, the first paragraph is how comp over base is calculated for anybody who isn't vested, period. And then the next paragraph takes out one more pay type out of that for anybody hired after 7/1 of 11. That's how it was constructed back in 11. It's like, it's this, and this for anybody who's not vested. Oh, by the way, anybody who started after this isn't in there either. So that construction wise, that is, even though it's bold italic here, that's actually the current statute.
Yep.
And one more question, if I may?
Yeah, of course. Go ahead.
Thank you. Page 7, line 14, you have January 13, it's changed, but then in line 18, credible service on January 1, 12.
Correct. That is the one date that has to remain the same because it is how much time did you have based on January 1 of 12. If you were to move that, you would have a moving chart
Right.
that cannot exist in the way that this is being removed.
Because
so that
that-
is the
that-
one place that it must remain that date.
That date there, that 2012 indicates how we read the chart. So on 12, if you have 1 year of service, which would push you out to the 13.
And
Does
if
that
you
make sense?
and if you look at the legalese at the back that does the annual shifting, it refers to that. It specifically exempts the table. I forget the word he uses, but it's
Except table heading.
except table heading because the table heading cannot change.
It has to stay.
That would unravel this whole thing if the table heading changed.
That could get fun.
Further question on that, then. Do we, again, do you need, line 27, so, on page 7 to line 6 on page 8? Because, on, line 34, you start taking those years off.
They have to be there so we can take them off.
They also have to be there in case somebody does choose to leave prior to the implementation of this. There has to be a way to calculate their benefit if they choose not to take the incentive and do the other year. Otherwise, there'd be no guidance
Right.
as to how that would work.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Thank you very much.
Oh, of course. Any other questions?
This stuff is so complicated that anybody who asks a question will probably enlighten everybody in the room.
Yeah. I do want to just thank Representative Pearson. This is really very well done, and from my perspective, I don't know how Jeff feels about it, but I like it. Is it all right? All right, very good.
Well, it's 3 weeks of no sleep
Yeah,
and I'm still going to OLS right now.
yeah.
So,
And to everybody who's in the room, we do want this to work for sure, and we want to make sure that it's written correctly. So if we run into anything that we feel like is compromising the goal, we'll make sure that it gets fixed along the way. But this looks really solid. So nice job.
Yes. And the point of the phasing is to provide a incentive for people not to retire immediately and to continue to work, because we value all of the contributions, and we certainly don't want to start trying to hire all the high-level policemen in the state at some point. We'd like to stretch it out over a few years.
Yeah, thank you for your service, guys. Really do appreciate it. All right, Steve, thank you so much. And I'm just going to give the floor to Marty for a little bit so he can go over all of his stuff. And just so everybody out there knows, this next section won't have anything to do with the amendment. It's more education on how this pension system works so that people can understand it better. Yeah, please do. Thank you for joining, though.
No, that's fine. The other thing is you're gonna wanna have, once you get that to Steve, you're gonna wanna schedule a subcommittee meeting. And I'd recommend Wednesday morning before 10.
Yep.
Just so that you can, subcommittee can look at it and recommend it, because we're gonna have an executive afternoon.
Yeah. I'll give Chris a
You
few
could
more.
never, well,
Should we take a vote right now? You want to take a vote on it right now? Oh, we can't because we don't have the finalized amendment.
right, and the other thing is that way you can look for, look for errors.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, because I had a bunch. Oh.
I think after another week, Representative Trill will be the pension expert, in the House caucus. So, so I had sent the full committee a handout yesterday in the email. You probably, yes. So yeah. So what that, and I think he may have copies if either of you gents don't, you do, okay. So what I tried to do here is I, show the current, oh. Okay. Oh, no problem. And I mentioned this to the subcommittee chair earlier, with respect, but I actually,
Yes, Peter. Gentlemen, we have to continue on with our work. If you'd like to have conversations, that's fine. But if you could please take them into the hall for us, that would be great.
so just with respect to the committee, I mentioned this to the chair earlier, but I'm actually off now, and I had made plans in the fall to go out of state this weekend, so I kind of have to leave a little bit after noon.
Sorry, Marty, if you'd suspend for just, gentlemen, with all due respect,
So
if you
I-
want to continue
well,
talking,
I
if
think
you
a
could
half an
please take it
hour will
outside.
suffice, but I can come back next week if needed to go through things. But this handout that I sent over to the committee yesterday, it shows the benefit structures, the tiers as they exist today, just as a compare and contrast with the with the changes to and the amendment. So just for the sake of brevity, we'll say Tier A, members vested prior to 1/1 of 12. Tier B are the folks affected by the amendment today, and then Tier C, this is anyone hired on or after July 1st of 11. Nothing changes for them, in the current amendment. So essentially, the benefit formula for the Tier A, the old plan, folks, if you will, is the minimum age in service to retire is 45, age 45 with 20 years of service. You'd have to hit both of those. So you could have somebody who doesn't get their 20 until they're 50 years old, depending on when they start. But you have to hit both of those minimums. There's still quite a number of them still active in the system. And when they retire, it's their average final compensation, and I'll talk about how that has changed as well, multiplied by 2.5%, multiplied by their service time. So the example here for this Tier A member is if they had an average final compensation of 80,000 times 0.25, is 2,000 a year times 20 years, working 20 years would get them 50% of their average final compensation. 100%, exactly. Yep. Yeah. Just, and now there's an important difference in the examples I put here. I used 80,000 as a baseline for comparison's sake, just for that. But the definition of earnable average final compensation as well as earnable compensation are both different for members in Tier B and Tier C. Those are some of the changes addressed in Representative Pearson's amendment, and those are the things that can't be changed after 3 years going forward in the amendment. But so basically, the changes made in 2011 cut out types of pay that count towards the pension and put additional calculations on how much money above your base pay that you can receive that counts towards your pension. Obviously, if you earn it, you're going to get those dollars. Some of the big things in that, and we could really get into the microscopic level, but some of the big picture things is with earnable compensation is pay for accrued unused sick and vacation time. Depending on the employer and depending how long somebody's there, they could have 10, 20 weeks vacation, or some employers pay out for unused sick, either total or on a pro rata basis. So it's a nice little chunk at the end of your career. And for the Tier A members, that's part of the average final compensation piece. So it's averaged over 3 years. So that goes into their final pension calc. For anybody in Tier B or C, they may get that money from the employer if the contract calls for it, but that isn't reported to NHRS and it doesn't factor into their benefit. So that's a big change. There's another one with average final compensation called comp over base. There was a bill last year to address it somewhat for Group 2 Tier B. There was that the state put the money up front to correct that. I think it was about 43 million. But the big picture thing you want to just think of is average final compensation and earnable compensation changes among the tiers, and it basically gets less and less. So when you're doing these sample calcs, the AFC is an apples to apples in some ways. So probably going pretty deep there. So, and then if you turn to page 2, this is TRB. This is the folks that this bill addresses, the 436 addresses with this amendment. And when the law was changed, New Hampshire chose to retroactively, change benefits for people who were in the system but not yet vested. That's the whole sort of, reason we're here today. Yeah. No. Like we had a gentleman from corrections who has since left the room who started in January of '02. So he had 9 years and 11 months when the law changed. So, so that, so that's how that worked. And this shows what basically other than the compensation calculation changes, they added a year of age and added a year of service to the minimums to retire, and also reduced the multiplier on a sliding table. So that person who was hired in 2002, rather than retiring at 45 with 20 years at 2.5% a year, they have to retire no earlier than age 46 with 21 years, multipliers, 0.1 less. And it sort of slides down. So the sample calcs on this page just show those. Right now, there's 4 levels in this table. The Representative Pearson's moving it to 9 levels, but, the calcs there. So essentially, even keeping the flat AFC, the pension benefits are, instead of 40,000, they're 40,300, 40,480. So you're working another year, 2, 3, or 4, basically, to get the same benefit that a TRA member gets if they retired at 45 with 20. So that's how the current structure works. And what this bill would do is, on a year-by-year basis, phase the people who are in Tier B back into Tier A, so that that person who started in 2002, if the bill passes as of next January 1st, 24, his new minimum age and service requirement for retirement would have been 45 and 20. His multiplier for his career would be 2.5 instead of 2.4, and those end of career payouts and calculations that tamp down the average final compensation go away, and he's retiring basically under the old plan. Okay, and that every year, one more group of people who were hired in that calendar year become eligible to retire under Tier A. So instead of doing it all at once, so everybody who was, hired between 2002 and July 1st of 11 could go out at 45 and 20 as soon as they hit it, they have to work a little bit longer. I was talking to Representative Pearson just before he had to leave, because I had an email and a phone call from Representative Abear this morning. She had a question about, well, how many years do people have to work? And that came up earlier in the conversation. So the way that changes are phased in, if you were hired in 2002, so you're right at the 9 years plus in Tier B right now, you missed vesting by that much. Next year, the vested by date would change to 1/1 of 13, okay? And that's effective on January 1st of 24. So somebody hired in 2002 would have has to work, 22, between 21 and 22, 21 point something in 22 years to retire. So they have to hang around longer, by a year than, as Representative Pearson indicated earlier. And so the phasing in here creates a de facto, 22 years of service is a minimum for everybody. Because the way the timing of the bill is, and I say 22 in round numbers, but it depends on when in the year you started. But so this is where it gets a little complicated, and this is why I just wanted to check with him first. So the folks hired in 2002 and 2003, so they had less than 10 but more than 8 years when the law changed. They can retire at 21 years. So literally, some of that hypothetical gentleman I cited could have retired February 1st under the current provisions had he choose, so he's going to have to wait till next year if this goes through to get the different benefit calc. And then the next tranche of people were those hired with less than 8 but more than 6 years, and that's 47 and 22 for those people, so they still have to work 22 years to get it. And then so everybody in the tiers right now is going to have to work 22 years before they can retire, and that's 2 years more than what the law said when they were hired. It was 20 years when for these people. You know, the law changed, and the people on the tail end of this have to work 23 or 24 years to be eligible. It reverts back to 22 for them, but it's still more year. They still have to work more years than they would have had the plan never changed, you know, back in 2011. So that it's a complicated concept. I mean, you know, so it's essentially moving year by year, you know, a couple of hundred people back into Tier A, you know, over a 10-year period. So that is the most complicated thing I had to tell you. So I'm sure you may have some questions, and if you got that, I'm going to give you an apple and an A+.
Does any of this affect people who are retired now?
No.
Is this $200 million, or whatever number that's gonna figure out to be, is that only for, basically for the, you know, to help pay for the Tier B?
Yeah. Yes.
It's not for Tier A. It's $250 million for 1,700 people.
That's the current population in the Tier B. So yeah.
And Tier B keeps getting smaller, right? Because the people move out of,
This is based on basically how many years of service they had at January 1st of 2012. So it's a fixed population. It ain't get any bigger. You know, when people retire or pass away, that's the only way it can get smaller. Or if they quit before before they're eligible to collect a pension and come back later and get it. You know, there's people.
And because it is a pension, we're estimating value per person over potentially 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. So each individual year is, you know, obviously not nearly as much, but if somebody lives 40 years, then that additional benefit is quite a bit of money from a pension standpoint.
I'm gonna guess that you, in school, you probably were pretty good in math.
Other than geometry,
I'm taking a stab at this.
that was painful.
If it were up to me,
No.
there'd be something a little extra in your paycheck next week. Sadly, it's not up to me. Thank you very much.
If this is in YouTube, I'll show this to my boss next week. Yeah. Thank you.
It used to be up on all these things, but when Speaker O'Brien took the retirement system away from eDNA and put it in the special committee, and that was 2 years of a void when I was not hearing about this all the time. So even though I do recall the situation where suddenly reshuffled the deck on that group of people who were more than 9 years, but not quite 10 years, and so forth. And they really did get the rug pulled out from underneath them, because suddenly they were going to have to work an extra year or so for the same amount of money. And that delayed their retirement, their ability to retire with the benefits that they promised. The extra year basically was maybe even a little bit more, kind of for free, right? I do recall being across the hall, and we were sitting up here, and there were Were you there, Marty?
Oh, the room-
The back of the room was full of guys that looked like,
It-
they kind of looked like you, only they were 30 years young.
Well, and to be
Handsome
to
dudes?
Well, yes.
to clarify though, Peter, what you
They were still employees.
but to clarify this because this is important. When we say they had to work another year for the same amount of money, some people might throw up their hands and say, "So what?" They still had to pay into the system for an additional year. So money's being taken out of their paycheck for that extra year in order for them to get the benefit. It's not just like, we're just going to delay it for a year and then you can get the same benefit you were going to get. If that had been the case, people probably would have rolled their eyes a little bit and been like, whatever. But some of these other guys had to work an extra 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, paying into the system, having money taken out of their paycheck to get that benefit. So that can be confused when you're looking at this chart because you're like, well, so if they were in tier A and they made $80,000 on average, then they're going to get a 40,000, but a year they have to work an extra year and they get an extra $320. So what's the big deal? Well, that $12,000 or $13,000 that they had to pay in to get there is a big deal. And if you go down to the next one, well, that other $24,000 that they had to pay in to get that is there, so it just compounds as it goes along.
Right, well, there were a lot of guys who they had a very glum look on their faces, and I remember Steve Pearson sitting there, and so I do remember that there was a lot of unhappiness. And so this new plan restores some equity to those people.
Not all of it.
I said some.
Yeah,
I said some.
except for the benefit of other people.
Yeah, no,
Not
no,
all of
it restores some equity to those people, so it's the right thing to do, it's not a full, and that's important for all of us trying to be made conscious of, and remain conscious of, that it restores some of the lost, equity, but not all, but it's better than nothing, that's for sure.
That is for sure. I mean, I would add to that. I would say it's also a commentary on the people who have been shorted that they are willing to compromise and come to the table and not demand everything. They're willing to give this one this take, and in this particular situation, I think that speaks very highly of their integrity. So. Because they could. I mean, they could just go back and take everything. But they
If he
really not do
email
that.
him,
They're asking for something.
email me to remind me to send you one.
Well, I mean, the legislature, made a mistake a long time ago in leaving a system in place that was only supposed to be there for a very short period of time to give some relief to the employers, to the towns, and so forth. And that got left in place, and it did a lot of damage to the system to the point where it was really.
What year was that?
2007, I think.
When the legislature decided to.
Oh, yeah, that was back in the
reduce
19
Because we had a.
1990s.
Yeah, the 90s, right? So
In
this
the
is an issue
90s.
That really goes back to the 90s.
Yeah, it was a temporary solution enacted in 91 that stayed on the books till 07,
Yeah, no problem. So we reduced rates for employers from during that time frame. So the
Oh,
employers
yeah.
weren't paying enough
I remember
money,
seeing the chart, and the
Yeah.
towns are paying like 1.3, 2.1.
and that's how we ended up with the.
Are we still in committee?
That's-
Should we be turning on the mics?
Not official, but we can.
I-
Yeah, no. I mean, at this point, I don't know that it really matters. I can though. Yeah, but so we're not just looking at an issue from 2011. This issue, the reason why they did what they did in 2011 is because of what the legislature did from the 90s to the early 2000s, and that's why we have the UAAL, because the municipalities weren't paying in enough money, so we weren't getting the return on the money that was supposed to be going in, which is why, I mean, I don't know, what did it get up to at its peak? It was almost 11 billion or 9 billion or the unfunded liability.
We topped off a little, just north of 6 about
Just
2 or
north of
3
the
years
6. Oh, it
ago, and
wasn't
it's
that
like 5.7, a little bit under 5.7
7
now.
now. Yeah.
And if I'll put on my fence straddling retirement system hat to sort of sum up 2011, it's like I think it's fair to say that legislative enactments in 2011 were a reaction to some of the funding mishaps in the 90s, plus the Great Recession. Whether they went too far or not far enough is not, that's, people can have their own opinion on it. But I think the reasoning behind that was of sins of the past, and they were trying to catch up. And whether that was too extreme or not, you'll hear different arguments from different people. But I think everybody who was here earlier will tell you it went too far. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we were going over the cliff until it was recognized what the situation was, because we were told that we were 125% funded back in the days under this so-called temporary situation. It was only supposed to be there for a couple of years, got left in place, and we were told we were 125% funded. And so we said, oh, great. I wasn't here at that time, but that's what was explained to us. So we created a special account as a source of funding for COLAs, but also to pay to subsidize a healthcare plan that was in place. And suddenly when it was realized, we weren't 125% funded. And we were going over the cliff, and we had to turn everything around to save the system for everybody.
Yeah, we had to absorb those other accounts. Yeah, Chris.
I know you have to go, so I just want to give you a little softball that I thought of at 2:30 this morning. All right, so we've got I'm just throwing out numbers. I don't care how accurate they are. $5 billion unfunded liability that we're
5.7.
going to pay off 10 years after I'm no longer here. But how are you going to do that? Because you can't, how are you coming up with $5 billion? Is that on the backs of the employers now?
Yeah.
Yes.
The employers pay the full responsibility for funding the liability the way the plan is set up. So a couple weeks ago, we did our orientation. Of the percentage the employers are paying, I think it's about 14% for employees, a little bit under 20 for teachers, and 28% for police and fire. 75 to 85% of that employer rate is paying down the unfunded. So basically, we're capturing, you're paying. It's basically, think of it as an interest payment. And it's part of the rates. It's going to be high through 2039 when most of the unfunded is going to be paid down. There's sort of a safety valve for future gains and losses. So we may, if a plan was at 100% funded at, 11:52, on February 10th, it could be underfunded in a minute, depending on how the market goes, or overfunded. So, you want to be close to 100% because that, you have a lot more flexibility with benefit construction too, because you're not accruing liabilities if you change things, and the rates are going to be lower. The rates are a percentage of payroll. So as salaries increase, just, through inflation or contract increases, employers are paying that same unfunded rate for another through 2039, and that's going to, every year money's coming in, it's being invested. So we're hopefully earning interest on that on a long-term basis. That's how we're going to get to the $5 billion, to pay that down. So that's how I turned the softball into like a 3-2, run the count before I took the walk. But I
So
apologize.
yes, the municipalities pay it, and
It's
and
on the
it's
backs of
either
the employer.
yeah, and if the rates of investments don't meet what we are expecting them to meet, then the rates for the municipalities will go up at some point to compensate, and vice versa. So if we overperform right now, then the rates should go down a little bit, but until 2039, when the UAAL is at arguably 100% funded, and then the rates for the municipalities should drop straight through the floor. That's the goal.
I'll be sure I'll be looking down saying, oh yeah,
I was there.
I was there. No, really, JC, I was there. On the original bill, it talked about teachers.
Yes.
This has nothing to do with
This has
teachers.
nothing to do with teachers, just group 2.
And that's some of the stuff we're gonna not see teachers in the amendment.
Right, correct.
Okay.
Yep. And that went both ways. There were some group 1 language in group 2 areas and some group 2 languages of group 1 areas. So those have been caught though. We're going to get rid of that stuff. So we will have to meet again probably before committee work next Wednesday because we'll have the final amendment at that point. I'm going to call it for like 9:30 or 9:40 probably, just a few minutes so we can sit down and say, here it is, it's clean. I'll get it to you beforehand so you can vet it if you want to, make sure everything looks good, but I'll vet it line by line myself. And then we'll vote on it and then it can go to exec later because it's got to be exec to that day out of committee next Wednesday.
Yeah.
So with that, guys, we're done here today. Thank you so much for your time.
I think the calendar at 6 p.m.
Oh, is that what it says? Oh, Carol already booked one? Yeah. Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, I guess 1 p.m. makes sense.